Hi, it's Penny here, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I DNFed in the year. So DNF means did not finish, and in 2024 I wanted to be better at DNFing. In fact, I think one of my goals was to DNF every book that I rated 1 or 2 stars, or that I would have rated 1 or 2 stars. Rating DNFs is a whole different conversation. But anyway, I wanted to DNF books more. Like, if I'm not enjoying them, there's no point pushing through to finish them and then not really liking them. And then I've just wasted even more of my time on them. And there are so many other great books to read that I don't have time for that. So I definitely did push through a few books that maybe I shouldn't have. But also, I'm pretty proud of DNFing a bunch of things. I have 10 things on the list. Most of them are book DNFs, but there's a couple that are really just series DNFs. So I want to start with a couple of graphic novel series before I get into all the novels. Firstly, what is this series called actually? I should have prepared better, but I never do. So the Shades of Magic graphic novel series by V. Schwab. This is like a graphic novel prequel series to the, it's up here but you can't see it here. It's a graphic novel prequel series to the Shades of Magic books. What are the books? Are the books just called Shades of Magic as well? I don't know. But anyway, basically these comic books were released telling the story of Cal and Rye's parents and kind of how their father became known as the Steel Prince. Which is basically that he has some kind of like metal magic powers. So this series is 3 volumes, and I had read the first one quite a while ago. In fact, I think I have it on my shelves somewhere. I think it's right up the top. We can't reach up there. Anyway, the problem is the way the art style meshes with the story means it's very hard to even tell what's going on a lot of the time. And I honestly just don't think it's really that great a story. And the art really isn't to my taste at all. There are a few bits that I remembered the first time I read it, I thought I really liked. But when I came back to reread it to continue the series, I thought, was it? Because I didn't really like it. Like, I liked it even less on a reread. Then I picked up the second book to continue it, the second volume, and I was so bored. So about halfway through, I DNF'd it. I did actually just flick through the pages and I could see that it wasn't going to change. And then actually, since I had the third volume also from the library, I just flicked through it. So you could argue that I did read it. But, I mean, I didn't read all the words. I just looked at the pictures. And that's not reading. Anyway, it was really boring. And I don't think the story is that good. So I suppose some people like it. Since I looked it up here, let's look at the average rating. 3.77, 3.88, and 3.76. That's really low, so I'm definitely not alone in not liking these, and I'm glad I didn't really bother reading them properly. Even though it wouldn't have taken me that long, but I still just don't think it would have been worth it. Then the other graphic novel series that I DNF'd, I definitely should have DNF'd earlier, and that is The Promised Neverland by Kayu Shirai and Pozuka Demizu. So in the beginning, I really liked The Promised Neverland. Basically, we're following this group of orphans in this orphanage, and they're really cute and adorable and lovely, but there's some weird things going on. Like, they all have these ID numbers tattooed on their necks, and every day they have to do a test. And if they do, what actually happens? If they do too badly at the test, they get taken away. Anyway, for whatever reason, at certain times kids get taken away and it's related to the tests, and they think these kids are being adopted, but then kind of the oldest 3 see something that makes them think this is not right, and eventually you learn what's going on, and it's pretty dark and twisted, and I really liked the darkness of it. And I also really liked, in some ways, it was similar to the Death Note series in its logic, and we kind of end up with these different people, or these orphans versus these other people, trying to like outwit each other, and I really liked some of that. However, with a lot of manga series, I have the problem where I just feel like it's too drawn out and there's not enough happening, and then certain volumes will just feel like filler. And like I ended up reading 15 volumes of The Promised Neverland out of 20 volumes, and I think I probably liked about half of the ones I read, and then not so much the other half. There were definitely some great ideas in there, but there was also a lot of like mucking around. And I can't actually remember because it was a while ago now that I DNF'd this. But there was something that made me think it definitely wasn't going to be a satisfying ending. Some of the stuff that was happening just didn't feel that logical anymore compared to the beginning of the series. So I decided I wasn't going to bother with those last 5 volumes. I think I looked up the reviews and saw that they weren't that great for the last 5 volumes, so I decided not worth it. Okay, then for the rest of my DNFs, I've tried to order it from like best to worst, so like books that I could have probably continued and they might have been okay, through to books that I'm really glad I didn't continue because I was having a terrible time. So the first one of these is actually a series DNF because I did read the first 2 books in the series during 2024, and that is The Cinder Spires by Jim Butcher. So I'd read the first book, The Aeronaut's Windlass, quite a while ago when it first came out, and then it's been a really long wait for the second book. And there are some elements to this book series that I really love. There's like talking cats and like this underground cat society, and the way that the magicians are kind of like mentally struggling because of their different understanding of the world, because of their magic. I really love that. But the actual plot and the like steampunk flying ship battles, I'm really not interested in any of that. I didn't really like the politics. There's just a lot I didn't like, and I felt like it was such a struggle to get through the bits I didn't like to get to the bits that I did like. For the second book, The Olympian Affair, I actually originally picked it up physically and I was struggling so much. So then I DNF'd it, so I did DNF it, but it was a soft DNF. I did then get the audiobook later and try it again, and because it was the audiobook, I just pushed through the whole thing. As I said, because I just really like the cats, but there weren't enough cats in the end for it to have been worth it. So I'm pretty sure that when the next book in the series comes out, I'm not going to continue. I feel like this is the DNF that I am probably the closest to reversing on if someone tries to convince me. Do you want to convince me? Then we have The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. So Lev Grossman wrote the Magician's trilogy that actually, I think I gave the first book 2 stars. Then I read the second book, gave it 3 stars. The third book, 4 stars. So I grew to love that series, even though I definitely had some problems with it. And that did mean I was a little bit hesitant going into The Bright Sword, but it was meant to be like kind of a Arthur and Camelot story, or like specifically the Knights of Camelot or the Knights of the Round Table, except that all the loser knights, the ones that aren't Arthur or any of the other famous knights, basically the ones that are left once Arthur is gone. And in the beginning, it was okay. We're following Colum, who really wants to be a knight. He's traveling to Camelot with that as kind of like his aspiration, even though perhaps he's faking his credentials a little bit. And then when he gets there, he discovers it's not what it seems. And there's also kind of like other knights there that we're getting the backstories of. And I just struggled because every time we would get a knight's backstory, I would just start becoming interested in them, and then we would go back to the present timeline, which they were always just doing nonsense stuff that I was very annoyed at. And then it would start in another night that I would have no interest in. And then by the time it convinced me that actually he was interesting, it would stop that. So it was like every time it caught my attention, it then stopped doing whatever I was interested in and went and did something else. And I just didn't like any of the characters, and I wasn't interested enough in the plot. I kind of liked some of the like bits that were clearly retellings of original Arthur and Camelot stories. And like honestly telling you about it now, I almost want to give it another go. I felt like it was kind of like a grimdark retelling of Arthur and Camelot. The writing style did kind of remind me of Joe Abercrombie a little bit, but not quite that good. But a similar sense of humor. But I just, in the end, I DNF'd this one about 50%. And I do wonder if maybe I should have DNF'd it earlier. Either I should have DNF'd it earlier or I should have finished it. But I guess somewhere in between is fine. Then we have When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. So this is a story about, well, what I was told is that it is a story about basically women start turning into dragons and a look at the impact on society. But honestly, there were not enough dragons in this book. It's mostly a story of this young girl whose mother has gone missing because she turned into a dragon. And it seems like her auntie may have also been a dragon in the past. And it's more about this young girl's relationship with her parents than it is about any of the other stuff. There are little snippets between each of the chapters telling of other women's experiences turning into dragons. And honestly, every single one of those was more interesting than the main story, but just I really wanted that dragon experience, and I had so many questions about these women turning into dragons and then what was happening with them. But that wasn't really the point of the story. It was more this turning into dragons was like a metaphor for like women breaking out from traditional roles, and like that's fine. I actually gave this book 2.5 stars. I thought it was okay. This was right at the beginning of the year when I was very dedicated to DNFing books that I didn't think I was going to love, and I didn't think I was going to love this. And I think from this I really learned a lot of books, I hear about them, they sound weird, but also if I look into them, they sound literary. And those kind of weird literary books, even though they often sound really interesting to me, I often don't end up liking them. That's what I've learned from this year. And actually, I'm looking at this on Goodreads right now, and I can see it's tagged historical fiction because it is kind of set in the 50s. And I'm also learning that I don't really like historical fiction either. So even though I was intrigued about the idea of women turning into dragons, I should have looked into this and said, no, not for me. The next book is another one that I think could be one that other people could like, but not me, and that is Game Changer by Neil Shusterman. So what happens in this story? A lot of these I DNF'd a while ago, so it's hard to remember them. This is about this football player, and he starts being like banged on the head while he's playing football and then kind of sliding into an alternate reality. And there's always like subtle differences in the world that open him up to like the sexism and racism of what's going on around him. And this guy's like star quarterback type white guy, and so like he's never ever thought about feminism and like racism before in his whole life, and so it's very eye-opening to him. But honestly, if you know anything about those topics, this will be very basic for you. I saw it somewhere described as like feminism 101 for white guys, which is interesting because Neil Shusterman is black, right? But I think he was just trying to lay out some of these concepts in a very simple, easy to understand way. And I think if you were going into the story with no understanding of it, it could be very mind-opening for you. But otherwise, it's just incredibly frustrating to read this white guy being so oblivious to everything that's going on around him. So I DNF'd this one at 50%. I definitely think it could be something some people could get something out of, but I don't think it was for me. And I just think maybe it didn't deal with a lot of the topics with much nuance. So like, unless you're a complete beginner to things, you're probably going to be frustrated with some of the things that this main character is thinking and doing. Then we have I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. So I picked this up straight after Foe by Ian Reid, and I loved Foe. I loved the mystery and not knowing what was going on. And I will admit, I had also already seen the Netflix adaptation of I'm Thinking of Ending Things, so I had some idea of what was coming. But I ended up DNFing it after only 30%. That's very quick DNF for me. And honestly, it was just because I didn't care about what was going on at all. It's basically this woman driving in a car with her boyfriend, and she's thinking about breaking up with him. And I guess there's some like indication that there's more going on, or that there's something weird going on. But honestly, it wasn't weird enough. There weren't enough questions within that first 30% that it was really just like 30% of this book was just this couple driving in a car talking about their memories. I don't care. I couldn't bring myself to care at all, and so I said, I'm out. Okay, we're up to the top 3, or the bottom 3, depending how you look at it. And these are ones that I actually really thought I was going to like them. So firstly, we have One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. So this is a romantasy type book, which maybe should have been a clue that I wasn't going to like it. However, I had read the first chapter as part of my try a chapter project that I'm doing, and I was really intrigued by it. We're following this young girl who's had this like magical virus that if you survive the virus, you end up with magical powers, but it's illegal to do magic. So actually, if they find out you've had this virus, they'll just kill you. But her family has managed to kind of keep it a secret, and now she has this weird shadow guy talking in her head. And as well, in this world, there's like these magical cards that are actually the only way you can do magic. So it's kind of like this big tarot deck of cards that each kind of have their own abilities, and our main character can also see those cards. Like, even if they're in someone's pocket, she'll be able to see that they're there. And then there's this bigger thing kind of going on with this like magic guy that we're trying to overcome, and the king, and some kind of conspiracy. Honestly, I couldn't care less about any of it. Also, the romance, completely unbelievable. I was not invested at all. The main character was really annoying, and I ended up giving up on this one. It actually took me till 60%. I was really trying to like this one, but 60% I had to finally just call it and say it wasn't going to be something I enjoyed, so I should just give up. I can definitely see why it's so popular with other people. Like, if you like romantasy type books, I think probably it's okay. I don't know. I don't like them. So it just wasn't for me in the end. It didn't have like enough of like fantasy world building and a fantasy plot. It relied too much on the weird group friendship dynamics and this romance rather than giving me the complex fantasy that I was hoping for. Then we have Artemis by Andy Weir. So Andy Weir wrote The Martian and Project Hail Mary. Both of those I really liked. I did have a few small problems with them, but overall I found them like addictively readable. I didn't want to put them down while I was reading them. I liked the sense of humor. I liked the science and the problem solving. Especially Project Hail Mary, I actually liked better. There's a particular character you get introduced to that I really liked. So having loved both of those, I thought I'll try Artemis. And also, this one was set on the moon. I love the moon. I thought this is going to be great. As well, it had a female main character, which I thought could be cool, but it turns out that Andy Weir can't write women because I don't know. I didn't like the main character at all. I thought the plot was like overly convoluted and really slow. And at 30% of the way, like basically we're following this woman who is a criminal on the moon, and she gets hired to do this particular like sabotage thing, even though like why would you hire her? She's kind of useless. But anyway, she gets hired to do this thing, and then she's like putting together a plan for how to do it. And it's got all that sciencey stuff that Andy Weir does in the other books. But firstly, the science seemed less believable. The plan was not a good plan. Like the whole criminal organizational aspect didn't seem very believable. But I gave up at 30% because I just didn't care whether this woman managed to pull off the thing she was doing or not. And given I didn't care, like I just didn't see any point in continuing. Then lastly, the book I DNF'd that I'm the saddest about not having liked is The Bone People by Kerry Holm. So this is like a New Zealand classic by a Maori author, debatably. Well, not really debatably, like a Maori author. So Kerry Holm was kind of like this hermit who liked to do things in her own particular way. And the book is very creative. I've seen a lot of people say they really love the writing and they really connected to this main character who to me seemed a lot like a stand-in for the author. She has said that it's not, but I think that's maybe just the lack of awareness because it seemed an awful lot like her from everything that I read about the author. So we're following this woman who kind of lives out in this tower in the middle of nowhere, and then this young boy turns up. Oops, I talked for so long that my camera stopped recording. Anyway, this main character, I've forgotten her name. There's a name similar to Kerry, anyway. She lives in this tower in the middle of nowhere, and this young boy turns up, basically breaks into her house and goes into some of her stuff. And then she kind of forms a relationship with this young boy. But it seems like this young boy must be like 6 years old or something. And straight away, she is fully supportive of this young kid drinking coffee, having alcohol, smoking tobacco, and it's only later she starts becoming suspicious that this young boy is being like physically abused, and instead of like saying, hey, that's unacceptable and like doing something about it, she's like, I'll just keep an eye on it. And it all kind of comes from this like deep mistrust of authority or like society. And I kind of get that, but also I do not want to read pages and pages of the 6-year-old boy being abused, and I could not empathize in any way with this main character who was doing nothing about it. In fact, was saying, yeah, why wouldn't you just give him alcohol and let him smoke? I just couldn't do it. And sure, there were parts where the writing was very creative and beautiful, but also there were some parts where I thought maybe it wasn't creativity, it was actually just bad writing. Because I did read this interview with Carrie Holm where she was basically like completely unwilling to take any feedback on her writing at all. So I DNF'd this once again at 50% of the way through. That does seem to be where I really start questioning myself if I'm not enjoying a book. And there were a lot of reasons for that, but it mainly was I just didn't want to read any more child abuse. And I've seen people say that this book like has some really deep messages about child abuse. I just don't feel confident that some of those messages weren't mild support for it. Ugh. Anyway, very glad I DNF'd it. Kind of wish I'd DNF'd it earlier. So, those are all the books that I DNF'd in 2024. Let me know if you've read any of them. I would love to talk with you about them in the comments. Maybe you could even try for some of them to convince me to go back to them, but most of them I probably won't be convinced. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.